The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Right now on The Spin-Off, a new cover story. Inside the urgent race to solve homelessness in Aotearoa. Some stories can't be told in 280 characters. Support The Spin-Off's long-form journalism and donate today at thespinoff.co.nz/members.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spin-Off, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire. Gone by lunchtime. Ben Thomas is there. Kia ora, Ben.
Morena.
Annabelle Lee-Mather. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
And Te Ahe Butler, as always.
Kia ora.
Without whom, etc. Today we will cover the Hīkoi that is presently travelling down the country, the apology for abuse in state faith care, and the American election, again, given that nobody else has spoken about that. But first of all, Annabelle, currently Auckland drivers are bracing themselves to be disrupted by a rabble of emotionally charged social justice warriors, by which I mean the audience going to Coldplay tonight for the first of 3 concerts. Also today, in Tamaki Makaurau, the Hīkoi mō te Tiriti, I think probably about as we speak, which is shortly after 9 a.m. on Wednesday the 13th of November, crossing the Harbour Bridge, all going to plan, and they're taken off in a few directions, one going to Imatau, the other to Bastion Point, I think.
Yeah, you've got a feel for Auckland commuters, because they're used to free-flowing motorways, so to have their daily commute disrupted will be incredibly frustrating and discombobulating for them, I'm sure.
Is that kind of like is the splitting up parties? Is that kind of like the school cross country where they're like, oh, we're just going out to inspect the sacred site at Ihumato, and they just keep going and go to the airport, and like in Wellington, they're like, oh wow, what took you guys so long?
So true. Where are you going? Just popping off, going to grab a cup of tea. I'll catch up with you guys later on. Mixed thing spotted in Corrie Lounge. Yeah. It's quite an elaborately planned event, Annabelle, which I think gets to Wellington on November the 19th. Is that right? Ahead of as the bill is going through the House at the moment. Pretty powerful gathering. I guess we'll keep watching it as it travels down the country.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to watch it unfold too, because one of the things that I'm observing is how a new generation of organisers have stepped up and are running this kaupapa, and their slightly different approach to running Hīkoi or activations compared to former generations, and it's quite wonderful to see. And the comms, the social media has been really professional, impressive. The messaging, I think, is really resonating with rangatahi, with kaumātua, with tangata tiriti, and I like that the message that's coming through is about, again, protection of the treaty, kotahitanga, unifying Aotearoa, all of those things. So it's impressive to watch.
Yeah, and there was a bit of drama because according to the cabinet paper, with cabinet making decisions on the bill, I think it was slated to be introduced next week. It was slated to have its first reading in the House next week, and that was what the Hīkoi had been sort of designed around, that time frame, so that they would arrive at the gates of Parliament, sort of as the bill hit the table in the House. The thunderous roar from outside would hit as well, and That was disrupted. It came to light that the government had moved it up about a week or so. So it was actually introduced last week and will have its first reading, I think, on
The
Thursday.
day after, funnily enough, by pure coincidence, I'm sure, the day after the American election, when everyone was very much focused on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was the issue. I think I suspect if it was a tactical play by the government, it was in order to stymie the Waitangi Tribunal's next report. The Waitangi Tribunal does have as a standing commission of inquiry, it has very wide powers and has assumed even greater jurisdiction to basically look at almost everything. The only thing is really a statutory bar on it doing is investigating matters that are currently before the House. So as soon as the bill is in the House and is being considered, until it passes, the Waitangi Tribunal can't do an investigation on that issue. I think the Waitangi Tribunal report was due to come out sort of in between when the bill was intended to be tabled and when it actually was tabled, and that would have cut that report short. As David Seymour has kvetched about in the media, the government has been very transparent with the tribunal. It does provide a lot of information, and one of the things it provided was an updated schedule as to when the bill would be introduced, and suddenly that became known to the sort of claimants, which. So I think there's a fair criticism of the tribunal there in terms of its porousness of the information that was provided, but I think that was probably the thinking by the government in terms of if there was a strategic purpose behind it, which there probably was. Interestingly, the Hīkoi organisers haven't changed up their schedule. They didn't sort of foreshorten the march and the activations across the centre to sort of hurry down to Wellington for the first reading. And that suggests, what you would probably expect, that they do see this as more of kind of a movement building exercise rather than just wanting the sort of pop of the protest coinciding with the first reading of the bill.
Yeah, and one of the organisers on RNZ this morning, Annabelle, was saying that we should be careful not to overstate the role of the Treaty Principles Bill in this Hīkoi, the message of the Hīkoi, that its kaupapa, in fact, was much wider than that.
That it's an ongoing demonstration of the messages that were being communicated by Kingi to Heitia prior to his death about, unity, kotahitanga, being Māori every day, as well as responding to a raft of issues across the board that are happening to Māori, but not specifically just about the Treaty Principles Bill.
The Green Party, meanwhile, called for a conscience vote on the first reading, urging the Speaker to make that call. I just had a chat with Andrew Geddes to try and get my head around whether or not that was a likely thing, and he explained to me that the Business Committee normally is consulted by the Speaker in terms of the question of whether it will be a conscience vote, and that normally operates on consensus, and it's highly unlikely that would happen. But of course it's not been talked about, and I can't think that it's likely. In other jurisdictions, you would expect someone to cross the House. It doesn't seem likely at all that anyone in the National Party or New Zealand First Party would cross the House in this instance. Do you think there will be, Ben, any sort of, before we get to select committee, any parliamentary activity of note, or is this really now just going to get kicked to select committee for that, I think, full 6-month process? Meanwhile, there'll be activity outside in parliamentary grounds.
Yeah, look, I think it'll probably go to the select committee without much, normally a first reading is set down for a couple of hours, 12, 10-minute speeches, I think, usually, and sometimes those are split into 5-minute speeches. But what I suspect you will see is a number of, the speech from David Seymour will be a sort of thundering and vehement speech in support. You will see the opposition parties using every minute to sort of probably attack the rest of the government on the bill, calling for Christopher Luxon to discontinue it, that sort of thing. And I think you'll probably see New Zealand First and/or National speakers will probably not even use their allotted time, sort of say, well, look, there's no harm in having a discussion, but it's not going to go any further.
And then sit down immediately.
And sort of rush through it, as you see sometimes when coalition partners are supporting, bills that they don't necessarily really particularly support themselves. And look, I wouldn't expect that anyone would cross the floor because it would be purely symbolic, everyone in National and New Zealand First will have an opportunity to vote against it on the second reading. So, and they will. So, I don't think that anyone will be looking to really risk their political career or kind of blow up their own party over that kind of gesture.
So, in this case, what would be the purpose of Chloe's tono to make it a conscience vote?
Well, that's interesting because you can still whip a conscience vote, but it would mean, I think, that each rather than the parties calling them as block votes, everyone would vote individually. I don't really think that necessarily was proffered with any expectation that it would be followed through, so much as to try and prick the idea of conscience within what is this odd process whereby the vote is being the bill is being put through despite being opposed by the government, by the leading party of government.
Yeah, I can't see any real implications for it except that it would probably get fewer votes on the first reading and then probably a few more votes on the second reading than it would have otherwise got.
Well, it'd be interesting if it was a conscience vote. The conscience vote at the second reading would be fascinating, wouldn't it? It would be interesting to see how that would play out. That would create problems for Luxon in a weird way.
But I think you're right. I think it's just sort of Chloe reasonably savvily trying to get the idea of sort of, trying to talk about it as a moral issue, whether it proceeds as opposed to Christopher Luxon, of course, very much trying to sort of portray it as this is merely a box-ticking exercise. That was the price of government, and the bill won't go into law.
There was one of those clips that was going around for a while in the last few months of the Taiwanese parliament, in which one of the, I think a member of the KMT had taken exception to a parliamentary reform bill and had run down to the dispatch box and stolen the bill. And then was tearing off around the chamber, and others leap on him, and it turns into a big scrum and a brawl. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to oppose legislation.
Oh, I wish we could have stuff like that in our parliament.
Don't want to end up in free press or anything like that. Hey, Annabelle, you were in Wellington yesterday, is that right? For the apology, which began, as far as I could tell, in the banquet hall with Erica Stanford, and then a range of apologies from public sector leaders and then survivors, and then moved up into Parliament. I'm surprised they let you in there. Did you get accreditation? I wouldn't have given you accreditation.
No, we were actually at Shed 6 because the parliamentary apology was actually done by ballot, because there's only a limited number of seats. So that in itself was quite controversial. So then they had a place in Auckland, one in Christchurch, and Shed 6 in Wellington, and Pipitea Marae, that were all hosting events with the live stream being broadcast here. So I was at Shed 6.
But there with a number of survivors as well.
Yeah, about 360 people, including survivors. Minister Shane Tiriti was there, Julianne Genter, some other MPs, and different people from the social service sector and all that sort of stuff, along with a number of survivors, Mōrehu.
Yeah, and there was an interesting, Erica Stanford sort of discussed that aspect of it, I think after the formal apology, and said that that had been a difficult decision to make. The Royal Commission had recommended the apology be made in Parliament so that it was recorded in Hansard sort of forever. And she said there had been quite a sort of a kind of difficult process, sort of balancing that desire up against obviously the desire for inclusivity and to get as many people there, given the literal physical constraints of Parliament. So one of the smaller but typically kind of fraught and difficult decisions, kind of that sort of attend this whole sort of process.
Annabelle, before the parliamentary apologies from Luxon and Hipkins, the 7 public sector leaders gave their apologies, and the one that attracted most attention, the one that got the most pushback, most heckling, was the one by Una Yargos, the Solicitor General.
Yeah, she's, I think it's fair to say, reviled by the Mōrehu community. She's someone who actively withheld important information and stymied their attempts to seek justice for what they had endured. I heard her being interviewed on RNZ this morning because there's calls for her resignation, understandably so, and it was quite fascinating to hear her talk about how she's learnt so much that she now realises that these names on the file were actually people and the damage her actions caused. And I mean, frankly, if you didn't realise these people were people in the first place, you have to wonder what sort of person you are. So of all of the CEOs who spoke yesterday, she got heckled and booed, and I think that until some accountability is seen, that that there will still be a huge swathe of the Mōrehu community who feel that justice won't be done until she's out of that role.
Accountability is such an interesting challenge with something like this, which runs across decades, which runs across generations, which runs across governments. And so people making apologies, in a way, it's not easy, but it's easier to make an apology for my own and previous governments, for my own leadership and previous leaderships. The difference with Una Yargos is that she is named in the Royal Commission report as somebody who has, as you say, stymied attempts for redress over several occasions. And
even withholding their own information, their own medical information from them.
I suspect at the time was thinking, I'm acting for the Crown. This is how judicial processes operate, legal processes operate. I don't know, Ben, did you see, I also thought there was a slight tenured nature about some of her apology too. Small things, but she said repeatedly, sometimes lawyers have, at times some have, and it's this sort of thing where you kind of...
Qualified.
You don't, we have failed here. We also failed here. Maybe it's nuanced. Obviously, that's not something that one should resign for, but overall, when we come back to that point of accountability, wouldn't it not be the right thing to do for her to go?
Look, I have to admit, I didn't see her speech, and look, it's there is this issue with public servants, particularly in terms of, to what extent were they quote unquote just following orders or performing the role, and to what extent were things sort of, did behaviour go beyond that? It is difficult in terms of the sort of the much lower order nature of sort of stymieing. A lot of these claims, particularly where they named living people as the sort of perpetrators. They were tested for evidence. I think that's probably proper. But and I guess when you're making an apology, you probably want to focus on the things that you did wrong, not any of the areas that you maybe did right. And so it's not necessarily the time for qualifications. Because I think that's sort of taken as read. Yeah, look, I wouldn't like to sort of venture as to what Una should do or what the government should demand of her. I thought it was notable, again, that Eric Stanford talked about how the sort of heckling and the sort of objections and that was kind of part of the process. That was something that was acknowledged and kind of provided for. It's not as if one moment of catharsis is going to sort of make anything better, but I think it's something they'll have to give a lot more thought to.
I think these children were tortured, abused physically, sexually, mentally. And then I think about high-profile cases of child abuse in this country where the families of the children who have been abused have not cooperated with investigations or police inquiries, and the vitriol that those people provoke by not actively participating, and understandably so. But that's exactly what she's done. She has helped abusers to help to cover up abuse. So I think that, we really have to see the Crown's actions in this for exactly what they are. But this is abuse on a mass scale, We're talking hundreds of thousands. So, I'm surprised that we haven't seen more in terms of people being held accountable in that regard.
One of the words that we heard a bit yesterday from survivors and critics was the word hollow. And the charge is that the apology doesn't mean much unless it comes with actions, which is understandable enough. Clearly a critical moment, but then the next step in many ways is how does the redress, which the government is committed to be clear. The government has acknowledged, Eric Stanford has acknowledged that the existing system administered by MSD is not fit for purpose. The Labour leader, Chris Hipkins, has acknowledged that they were much too slow in failing to get things underway following the interim report, which is very clear about the need to get cracking on redress. So there's sort of they're going to change the system. They put however many $30 million into that, $50 million. But the big challenge that awaits is how to make those determinations about compensation, to whom they apply, how much. It's a devilish piece of work that awaits the government in the coming year or so.
Yeah, it's incredibly fraught task. Some of the early announcements that were made in advance of the apology, for instance, it was really good to see they addressed the issue of the historical inequity in the Lake Ellis compensation payments. But when you think about the quants that this was, that the initial group of litigants who brought to light really a lot of the horrors of Lake Ellis received a settlement, but they had one of these kind of no win, no fees sort of legal arrangements, and so about I think almost 40% went on legal fees, and then when subsequent compensation was paid to other victims or survivors, they received the sort of full amount minus, without the legal fees deducted. So there was about, I think it was the difference between $70,000 or $40,000. Now, even when you think about that quantum, that $70,000 for being literally tortured at Lake Ellis, you're like, well, Christopher Luxon said a number of times yesterday, no amount of money, can make up for what happened. But how do you even start to make a reasonable assessment, and how do you start to compare that, other kinds of abuse to that, and then apply it, as Annabelle said, over 100,000 people. That's an incredibly challenging exercise, I think, for any government.
I listened to Paula Crawford-Moyle being interviewed on Radio Wātea yesterday. Paula is a very well-known Māori Huan advocate, and the point she made is that we've heard the government talk about redress being an incredibly complex process. She disagrees. She says it's actually not complex, it's just expensive. And I think she's absolutely right. And what they could do is actually just do a payment to everyone across the board immediately, and a good payment too. And then they can work through the more complex aspects of it later on. I mean, I'm speaking out of school here. I don't know what it is that the Māori who want, but to me, if you can get COVID payments out quickly, and if you can get, relief for landlords via their tax quickly, I'm sure that you could figure out a way to give some relief and redress to our Māori who, and the thing too is, not only is redress just and all of those things, but these guys had their potential robbed from them. It's really hard to have a wonderful, successful career as anything when you've been having electric shock treatment from the age of 13 at Lake Alice. So they've had their economic potential stolen from them at childhood. So, I understand their desire to not dilly-dally. These guys not only do they need, help for housing and all of that sort of stuff, but the health damage caused by, and not just the Lake Alice ones, but for example at Lake Alice, if you're getting shock treatment, that absolutely ruins your teeth. All their teeth are buggered. They're all wearing crappy false teeth because they've lost all their teeth from the shock treatment they went through. So just some of the basics like that, they need their money now. And I think it's actually not as complex as we'd like to think it is.
It's now 8 days since the American election, and we always approach these things with an abundance of caution. So the Gone by Lunchtime Decision Desk has taken some time analysing the granular data, but we're now ready to call it. And we're ready to call the presidency for Donald Trump, who will return to the White House. Annabelle and Ben, you both suggested that Trump would win. Not important what I said. Annabelle, you didn't endorse. You did. You issued a non-endorsement. Do you regret that now? It could have been the difference.
A non-endorsement.
Non-endorsement of nothingness.
Obviously it would
an
have.
Endorsement of the void.
Obviously, it would have made a difference.
It might have been.
But I don't regret that I did it.
You don't regret. It's interesting, isn't it? Trying to process it all. Did you see, Ben, the picture of Christopher Luxon on the telephone with Donald Trump yesterday, using that slightly strange technique of the arm across? He uses the arm, holds the phone in the left hand across the body.
Like that?
Yeah. It's an interesting...
Almost like cradling a baby.
Listening
closely to its breath.
Very much like that.
Beautiful.
I'm going to try that.
He may have been singing a beautiful lullaby to Donald Trump.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's right. I saw a story in the Herald saying that we were well up the list of 190 countries.
Woo!
Boom.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
The future is rosy.
It's I mean, it was an exciting time last week to wake up in November 2016 And
It really was, wasn't it? It really was.
To doing the next 8 years exactly as we did before.
The thing about it was, in terms of the echo of 2016, it seemed to me that there was less kind of visceral shock because, well, maybe I'm speaking personally because I
Because most people voted for him.
well, no, because I don't mean there. I mean around the world. I mean in terms of it just seemed impossible to me at the time, whereas it didn't seem impossible this time. But the first time round, actually, the consequences, while there were many and they were varied, and some of them, in my view, appalling, he was constrained. He was constrained by the administration around him. This time around, probably not going to be so, So you look at some of the people that are ready to go, including Susie Wiles and Toby Morris.
Man, who would have thought about Susie Wiles,
It's quite a trajectory. A trajectory for New Zealand's leading science communicator. To be clear, a different Susie Wiles.
Allegedly.
I don't know. There is maybe there is an opportunity there, given Elon Musk has tweeted positively about Christopher Luxon. Peter Thiel has a lovely crib on the shores of Lake Wakatipu or somewhere. And maybe when they issue these tariffs, they go, not these guys, we'll let these guys off, but lovely wine, lovely bolt hole for, tech bro billionaires, and lovely lullaby that the Prime Minister sang to Donald Trump. Is there any prospect of that?
I mean, look, even if we get off sort of lightly on this exciting adventure with tariffs to replace income tax in the United States, the sort of mounting pressure with China and the nations, I guess, that are targeted with tariffs will fundamentally, I think, weaken the international quote-unquote rules-based order on which a small exposed trading nation like New Zealand relies. By and large, only bad news coming out of this, I would have thought. More personally, as a very online person, more sort of worried about the kind of psychic toll of the next 4 years.
Ben, you don't have to do that. You don't have to stay on that platform. You can just log off, bro.
Let it go. I mean, we have tariffs already because he brought in tariffs last time, didn't he? And interestingly, Biden didn't get rid of them. Yeah.
I mean, there is that bigger, in terms of the proverbial tightrope that we walk between our American and Chinese commitments, affiliations, and all that.
I invented that metaphor.
You did. Thank you. Already under Winston Peters as foreign minister, there had been, and Christopher Luxon and this administration, there had been an inching, but a discernible inching towards our American partners, right? And in some ways that might seem prescient. There's a suggestion that that they've been sort of sowing a path to be able to be ready for a Trump presidency again. But in terms of what you're describing, Ben, that risk is that if it becomes even more bellicose, if China start to go harder over Taiwan and the South China Sea, then we're going to find ourselves in a really tricky position where a 20% tariff might seem like a picnic compared to, how quickly we've seen that the Chinese can make it difficult for our exporters. I mean, there's a real risk there.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and that's to say, and that doesn't even, take into account the sort of the wider stability of the world,
war,
in a geopolitical sense. Marco Rubio's just been appointed or floated as Secretary of State. He's apparently quite a hawk, So
It is now, yeah.
yeah, I just also Little Marco, famously dubbed Little Marco by Trump
In the primary way back in the day.
So I mean, one thing about Trump, he clearly doesn't hold a grudge. So I mean, it's quite possible that John Kelly might be back.
He seems to be able to get over grudges when the people against whom he held grudges sort of come before him naked, supine, and genuflect, carrying whatever he needs, like a giant Big Mac on a silver platter.
Trump is a throwback to old-fashioned, wealthy, powerful political figures. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, he's kind of that new kind, a worse kind, I think, who want to be loved. Who want to want people to like their tweets, want to be
All he
recognized
wants
for
is
their
for people to
gambling.
say he did a funny thing on Twitter. That's it.
Whereas Trump, I think he's from that older class of, and I think this is what he mostly has in common with the kind of the dictators, the like in North Korea, like Gaddafi. He really wants that fake love. What he really wants is the knowledge that people
Kiss the
know
ring,
they
motherfucker.
do.
Yeah.
The kind of abasement. In the old days before social media likes ruined everything, it used to be that after you had run out of jets and buildings, the only thing left to get to obtain was human dignity. So,
we should be under no misconceptions. China is a much better friend to us than the US is. We do, I think, 3 times more trade with China than we do with the US. They've still got the shits with us over the anti-nuclear thing. And there's going to be no free trade agreements with Trump. The other thing, too, in terms of Taiwan and China and all of that stuff is the US is fighting on all fronts in the Middle East now. So I don't think we're going to see a whole lot changing in terms of what happens in China and the Pacific over the next 4 years. They're dealing with Israel and everything that's happening over there. So AUKUS, all of that stuff, I think, is going to cool right down.
We don't even know if Trump is interested in AUKUS. I mean, I would say in terms of the China thing, America has a deeply dysfunctional democracy, but it is at least a democracy. The reality of China is it's not. It's an autocracy. And,
there's probably more variation of political views within the Chinese Communist Party, within the church of the Chinese Communist Party than there is between the Democrats and the Republicans at this point.
Interesting.
Besides from issues like reproductive rights, economically, there's not a huge amount of difference.
We will discuss that issue in more depth on our sister podcast, The Tightrope.
The thing is, as a political watcher, we're really, as political watchers, we're more interested sort of in the in the postmortems, in the analysis, what went wrong. I've been watching a lot of astrology TikTok, where there's there's some real soul searching going on as to why all the astrologers predicted a Kamala Harris win, but it didn't come to pass. Wow. One explanation is that they didn't.
Is Ken Ring around still? Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, they didn't account for the fact that Trump's house was in its 10th transit, which is a real rookie mistake. But
such an oversight, eh?
Yeah.
Have you got an account on TikTok, Ben? Are you present?
Just to feel like my mind is melting out through my ears.
Keep your finger on the zeitgeist.
I'm a passive
TikTok. So you can advise all your clients. Good. All right, that's enough. Kia ora, thanks. Anything else? No, I don't think so.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.